Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled as she clutched the worn letter that had changed everything. The paper felt like ash between her fingers, each word a lie that had lured her across an entire continent. She stood on the dusty main street of Ridgeway, Montana Territory, her traveling trunk at her feet, staring at the saloon where her promised husband was supposed to meet her. Instead, she'd found him inside, drunk and laughing with a woman on his lap. The journey from Boston had taken 3 weeks. 3 weeks of rattling trains, cramped stagecoaches, and sleepless nights in questionable boarding houses. She'd sold everything she owned to pay for the passage, burned every bridge behind her. Her aunt's disapproving face had been the last familiar thing she'd seen, and even that memory was tainted with judgment. Respectable women didn't become mail-order brides. Desperate women did. But James Crawford's letters had painted such a different picture. He'd written of his successful ranch, his comfortable home, his desire for a refined wife to share his prosperity. He'd seemed educated, kind, thoughtful. His photograph showed a clean-shaven man with gentle eyes. The reality was a bloated stranger who'd looked through her like she was invisible when she'd approached him in that saloon. "You must be confused, miss," he'd slurred, his breath reeking of whiskey. "I never sent for no bride. Someone's played a cruel joke on you." The woman on his lap had giggled, and Sarah had seen the truth in that moment. There had been no mistake. James Crawford existed, but he'd never written those letters. Someone else had, using his name, his photograph perhaps stolen or bought. But who would do such a thing, and why? Now evening was falling, painting the rough frontier town in shades of amber and shadow. Sarah had nowhere to go. The few coins left in her purse wouldn't buy passage back east, wouldn't even buy a week's lodging. The hotel keeper had quoted her prices that made her stomach drop. This wasn't Boston, where her modest funds might stretch. This was a place where everything cost more and mercy cost most of all. She'd asked about work, her pride crumbling with each word. The hotel keeper had looked her up and down with an expression that made her skin crawl. "There's work for women here," he'd said slowly. "But I don't reckon you want that kind." Sarah had fled before he could elaborate, understanding enough. The saloons weren't just saloons. The boarding houses weren't just boarding houses. This town would devour women like her, women without protection or means. She found herself walking toward the edge of town without conscious decision, her trunk abandoned by a water trough. Someone would steal it, probably already had. Everything she'd brought from her old life, gone. Maybe that was fitting. That life was gone too. The sun was setting behind the mountains, turning the sky violent shades of red and purple. Beautiful and terrible at once, like everything in this godforsaken place. She'd read about the West in dime novels, imagined adventure and new beginnings. No one had written about the crushing weight of being utterly alone in a place that didn't want you. A rider appeared on the road ahead, silhouetted against the dying light. Sarah stepped aside to let him pass, keeping her eyes down. She'd learned quickly that eye contact invited conversation, and conversation invited questions she couldn't answer. Where was she going? She didn't know. Where was she staying? Nowhere. Where was her husband? A lie she couldn't even articulate. But the rider didn't pass. The horse's hoofbeat stopped beside her. Sarah kept walking, her heart hammering. Boston had taught her about men who approached lone women. This place would be worse. "You're the one from the stage." The voice was deep, accented in a way she couldn't place. Not the rough frontier drawl she'd heard in town. Something older, more careful. The bride no one claimed. Sarah stopped walking but didn't look up. News traveled fast in small towns, it seemed. Her humiliation was already public knowledge. "I'm fine, thank you. Good evening. You're heading into Lakota territory. You won't survive the night." Now she looked up, and her breath caught. The man on the horse wasn't what she'd expected at all. The rider was Lakota himself, that much was immediately clear. His hair fell long and dark past his shoulders, and his face held the sharp, proud features of the indigenous people Sarah had only seen in photographs and paintings. But he wore a mix of clothing that spoke of two worlds: buckskin leggings beneath a dark wool coat, traditional beadwork alongside a silver watch chain. His eyes, deep brown and unwavering, studied her with an intensity that made her feel transparent. "I'm not going into anyone's territory," Sarah managed, though her voice wavered. "I'm simply taking a walk. In the dark. Without supplies. Wearing city shoes." He gestured toward her leather boots, already scuffed and dusty from the journey. "The next water source is 12 miles. There are wolves. Sometimes Lakota war parties, though less now than before. Mostly just emptiness that will kill you slowly." Sarah wanted to argue, to maintain some dignity, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She swayed slightly, catching herself. When had she last eaten? The stagecoach stopped that morning, a piece of hard bread she'd forced down despite her churning stomach. Then I suppose I'll die, she heard herself say. It doesn't seem to matter much. The rider dismounted in one fluid movement. Up close, he was taller than she'd realized, and younger too, perhaps 30, though it was hard to tell. His face bore a thin scar along one cheekbone, and his hands, she noticed, were calloused but clean. I am called Maka Ozeangzang by my people. The whites call me John Stone. I lead a band that camps 5 miles west, between the territories. I don't understand why you're telling me this. Sarah's head felt light. The ground seemed to tilt slightly beneath her feet. Because you need somewhere to go, and I'm offering you a choice. He spoke carefully, as if considering each word. Come to my camp. You'll be fed and given shelter. No one will harm you. In the morning, if you wish to return to Ridgeway, I'll provide an escort. If you wish to stay, we'll discuss terms. Terms? Suspicion cut through her fog of exhaustion. What kind of terms? The honest kind. Something flickered in his eyes, amusement, perhaps, or respect. I need a teacher for the children in my band. Someone who can read and write English, who understands the white man's world. The government agents promise schools, but their promises are wind. My people need knowledge to survive what's coming. You need safety and purpose. It could be an arrangement that benefits us both. Sarah stared at him, trying to process this unexpected turn. A teacher. Not a wife, not a servant, not the terrible alternatives the hotel keeper had implied. A teacher. It was the profession she'd trained for back in Boston before her father's death had left her penniless and dependent on her aunt's cold charity. The profession she'd abandoned when answering James Crawford's false letters had seemed like the only escape. Why would you help me? She asked. You don't know me. I know enough. I was in Ridgeway today, selling horses. I saw you arrive on the stage. I saw Crawford turn you away. I saw the hotel keeper look at you like meat. His jaw tightened. I know what this town does to women with nowhere to go. I won't watch it happen and do nothing. But I'm white. Aren't your people and mine? She struggled to find words that weren't offensive. Everything she'd heard about Indian wars, about conflicts and hatred, seemed inadequate for this moment. Enemies? Maka Ozeangzang's expression hardened. Some are. Some whites killed my wife 3 years ago when they raided a peaceful camp. They thought all Indians were the same, just as you probably think all whites are the same. But I've learned that people are people. Some good, some evil, most somewhere between. I judge by actions, not skin. The casual mention of his murdered wife hit Sarah like a fist. This man knew loss too, knew what it meant to have everything ripped away. I'm sorry, she whispered. About your wife. He nodded once, acknowledging her words but clearly not wanting to dwell on them. The offer stands. Decide now. It's nearly dark, and the temperature drops fast here. Sarah looked back toward Ridgeway. She could see the saloon lights glowing, hear faint music and laughter carrying on the wind. That town held nothing for her but degradation and slow destruction. This stranger offered uncertainty, yes, but also a glimmer of something she'd thought lost. Purpose, dignity, maybe even safety. It was madness to go with him. Every rule she'd been taught screamed against it. But those rules had led her here, hadn't they? To this moment of absolute desperation. I'll come, she said. But I want your word that no harm will come to me. You have it. He extended his hand. I swear by my honor and my people. Sarah placed her hand in his, and he pulled her up onto the horse behind him. The Lakota camp materialized from the darkness like something from a dream. Sarah had expected chaos or primitiveness based on the lurid stories she'd read, but what she found instead took her breath away. Several large teepees stood arranged in a careful circle, their surfaces painted with symbols she couldn't read but found beautiful. Cook fires burned in a central area, casting warm light on faces that turned to watch her arrival with open curiosity. Maka Ozeangzang helped her dismount, his hand steady on her arm as her legs, stiff from riding, nearly buckled. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts. Old men smoked pipes and watched with unreadable expressions. Sarah felt the weight of dozens of eyes and fought the urge to run. This is Sarah Mitchell, Maka Ozeangzang announced in English, then repeated something in Lakota. She's here as my guest and under my protection. She'll teach our children to read and write the white man's language. An elderly woman stepped forward, her face a map of wrinkles, her eyes sharp as flint. She spoke rapidly in Lakota, gesturing toward Sarah with clear skepticism. Maka Ozeangzang responded in kind, his tone respectful but firm. The exchange continued for several minutes while Sarah stood frozen, understanding nothing but sensing this was some kind of negotiation about her fate. Finally, the old woman turned to Sarah and spoke in heavily accented English. I am Wichapi Wi, Star Woman. I am grandmother to this band and grandmother to him. She pointed at Maka Ozeangzang. You will stay in my teepee until we know your heart. You will work for your food. You will respect our ways. If you bring trouble, you will leave. You understand? Yes? I understand. Sarah's voice came out stronger than she felt. Thank you for your hospitality. Star Woman snorted. Hospitality is for guests. You are ? Come. The next hours passed in a blur of new experiences. Star Woman's teepee was surprisingly spacious inside, with carefully arranged sleeping areas, storage, and a central fire pit. The old woman gave Sarah a buffalo robe to sleep on and a bowl of stew that tasted unlike anything she'd ever eaten, rich with unfamiliar spices, chunks of meat and wild vegetables. Sarah devoured it, not caring that her manners were abandoned, that she probably looked desperate. You eat like person who knows hunger, Star Woman observed, settling across the fire with her own bowl. That is good. People who know hunger understand value of food, of home, of safety. People who never know hunger often make poor choices. Sarah looked up, shame coloring her cheeks. I've been foolish. I came west for a man who didn't exist. I believed lies because I wanted them to be true. Many people believe lies they want to be true. You are not special in this. Star Woman's bluntness was oddly comforting. But you survive. You accept help when offered. You do not pretend you are not afraid when you are terrified. These things show character. I am terrified, Sarah admitted. Everything I knew is gone. I don't understand your language or your customs. I don't know if I can actually help teach your children anything useful. Fear with honesty is wisdom. Fear with lies is cowardice. Star Woman set down her bowl. My grandson brings you here because he sees something. Maka Ozeangzang has vision sometimes. He sees what others miss. When his wife died, he became hard, closed. Now he brings white woman to teach children. This means something is changing. Sarah thought about the tall, scarred man who'd saved her from a slow death in the wilderness. He mentioned his wife was killed by white men. Yet he helps me. I don't understand. Understanding comes later. Now comes survival, work, proving yourself. Star Woman rose stiffly. Sleep. Tomorrow you meet children. They will be your true judges. Sarah lay awake long after Star Woman began snoring softly across the teepee. Outside, she could hear low voices, occasional laughter, the sounds of a community settling for the night. It was utterly foreign and yet somehow less alien than the hostile silence of her aunt's Boston house had been in those final months. She thought about James Crawford, about the mysterious person who'd written those letters in his name. Had it been a cruel prank? A con? She'd probably never know. But lying here in a Lakota camp under a vast Montana sky, she felt a strange emotion bubbling up beneath her fear and confusion. Relief. Whatever happened tomorrow, she wasn't trapped in that suffocating Boston life anymore. She wasn't going to end up in some Ridgeway brothel. She was somewhere completely unexpected, and while that was terrifying, it was also oddly liberating. No one here knew her family's fall from grace. No one knew her father had died in debt, that her aunt had begrudged every morsel she'd eaten. Here, she was simply Sarah Mitchell, a woman who could read and write and teach. Maybe that would be enough. Maybe, for the first time in her life, she could be valued for what she could do rather than dismissed for what she lacked. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance. Sarah pulled the buffalo robe closer and let herself imagine, just for a moment, that she might actually survive this. Sarah's first morning in the Lakota camp began with freezing water from a creek and 6 suspicious children staring at her like she'd grown a second head. Star Woman had roused her before dawn, handed her a piece of dried meat and some sort of flatbread, and marched her to a cleared area where the children waited with expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. This is teacher, Star Woman announced. She will show you white man's markings, the talking papers. You will listen and learn. This is Maka Ozeangzang's command. Then she left, and Sarah faced 6 pairs of dark eyes alone. The children ranged in age from perhaps 5 to 12, 3 boys and 3 girls, dressed in a mixture of traditional clothing and white man's garments. None of them spoke. They simply stared. "Hello," Sarah began, her voice sounding absurdly formal. "My name is Miss Mitchell. I'm going to teach you to read English. Can any of you already read?" Silence. One of the older boys crossed his arms defiantly. Sarah tried again. "Do you speak English? Can you understand me?" "We understand," the oldest girl finally said. She was perhaps 11, with intelligent eyes and a serious expression. "We speak some English. The traders teach us bad words. The missionaries teach us about their God who loves us but sends us to fire if we don't obey. You will teach us different lies?" The bluntness startled Sarah, then made her want to laugh. "I'll teach you to read and write. Those are tools, not lies. What you do with those tools is up to you." "Why should we learn white man's markings?" the defiant boy challenged. "My father says white man's words are poison. He says we should fight, not learn." Sarah considered this. She could give them platitudes, tell them education was valuable for its own sake. But these children deserved better than empty words. "Because the white men are coming whether you want them or not," she said quietly. "And when they come with their papers and their treaties and their laws, you'll need to understand what those papers say. Otherwise, they'll cheat you. They'll tell you one thing while the markings say another." The children exchanged glances. The oldest girl nodded slowly. "This is what Marker Ozayangzayang says too. He says his wife died because he couldn't read the soldiers' orders, didn't understand the white man's borders." Sarah's heart clenched. So that was the deeper story. "I'm sorry about his wife. About all the injustice done to your people. I can't fix that. But I can teach you to read the words of people who might try to harm you. That's a kind of weapon too." The defiant boy uncrossed his arms slightly. "You say true things. Most white people talk around truth." They began with the alphabet, drawing letters in the dirt with sticks. Sarah quickly discovered these children were sharp as knives despite their lack of formal education. They memorized the letter shapes after seeing them twice. They asked questions that revealed sophisticated understanding of sounds and language structure. They challenged her constantly, testing whether she actually knew what she claimed to know. By midday, Sarah was exhausted but exhilarated. The oldest girl, whose name was Zintkala Luter or Red Bird, stayed after the other children ran off to eat. "You are different than other white women who come here," she said carefully. "The missionary women look at us like we are dirty. You look at us like we are people." "You are people," Sarah said simply. "Smart people who deserve to learn." Marker Ozayangzayang chose well. Red Bird tilted her head. "He has been sad since Winyang Waste died. That was his wife's name. It means beautiful woman, and she was. The soldiers shot her when she ran to protect the children during the raid. Marker Ozayangzayang was away trading. He came back to find her body. He was never the same." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "That's unspeakable. Many unspeakable things happen. But you are here now, and that is good. The children need learning. Marker Ozayangzayang needs purpose beyond grief. Maybe you help with both." Red Bird stood. "Also, Star Woman says you must help prepare food tonight. Being teacher doesn't mean not working." The days began to blur into a rhythm. Sarah taught in the mornings, helped with camp work in the afternoons, and spent evenings learning Lakota words from Star Woman, who proved to be a demanding but effective instructor. The old woman seemed determined to make Sarah useful beyond just teaching, showing her how to prepare food, repair clothing, identify useful plants. "You are guest now, but guest becomes burden if they stay too long," Star Woman explained. "You must become part of camp, not separate from it." Marker Ozayangzayang appeared and disappeared, often gone for days at a time on trading trips or diplomatic missions to other bands. When he was present, he sometimes watched Sarah teach from a distance, his expression unreadable. Once, he approached after a lesson and spoke to her in careful English. "Red Bird says you do well. The children respect you. They're remarkable students. Faster learners than many children I taught in Boston. They must be fast. Time is short." His face darkened. "More settlers come every month. The government makes new rules. Soon there may be no space for people like us, living between the white and Lakota worlds." Sarah wanted to ask what he meant, but he'd already turned away. Yet his words haunted her. She'd been so focused on her own survival that she hadn't fully grasped the larger tragedy unfolding around her, an entire way of life being slowly strangled by the inexorable westward push of her own people. That night, unable to sleep, she stepped outside the teepee and found Marker Ozayangzayang sitting alone by a dying fire. Marker Ozayangzayang looked up as Sarah approached, his face half in shadow. For a moment, she thought he might send her away, but instead he gestured to a spot across the fire. Can't sleep. Too many thoughts. Sarah settled onto a log, pulling her borrowed shawl tighter against the night chill. 3 weeks had passed since she'd arrived at the camp, 3 weeks that felt both like an eternity and no time at all. Red Bird told me today that you're going to Fort Benson next week to meet with the Indian agent. She's worried. She's smart to worry. The agent wants to convince my band to move to the reservation. He has papers, promises of supplies and protection. Makar Ozang's voice carried bitter amusement. The same promises they made to Black Kettle before Sand Creek. The same promises that came before every broken treaty. Will you go? To the reservation? I don't know. He prodded the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. My people are divided. Some say we should fight, preserve the old ways to the death. Others say the old ways are already dead, and we must adapt or be destroyed. I lead this band because I walk between, I know both worlds. But that makes me trusted by neither. Sarah heard the exhaustion in his voice, the weight of impossible choices. What do you want to do? What I want doesn't matter. What's best for the children, for the elders, for the future, that's what matters. He looked at her directly, firelight reflecting in his dark eyes. You've changed things here, Sarah Mitchell. The children have hope now. They see that learning the white man's ways doesn't mean abandoning who they are. You've given us a tool we didn't have before. I've barely done anything. Taught some letters, a few words. You've done more than you know. He was quiet for a moment. When I lost Wingyang Waste, I lost my faith in bridges between our peoples. I thought all whites were the same, greedy, violent, incapable of seeing us as human. Then I watched you step off that stage in Ridgeway, watched your world collapse, and I saw something I recognized. Someone who'd been betrayed, abandoned, lost. Someone who could have turned bitter but chose to keep going. Sarah's throat tightened. I didn't have much choice. We always have choices. You could have stayed in that town, accepted degradation to survive. You could have despised me for being Indian, refused my help. You could have treated the children with the contempt most whites show them. But you didn't. You chose differently at every turn. He paused. Why? Because I was drowning, Sarah whispered. And you threw me a rope. Because those children looked at me like I might matter, like what I knew had value. Because Star Woman fed me and sheltered me when she had every reason not to. How could I respond with anything but gratitude and respect? Most whites find a way. Maka Ozangzang stood and walked around the fire to sit beside her. Closer now, she could see the lines of strain around his eyes, the weight he carried. I need to tell you something. The man who wrote those letters pretending to be James Crawford, I know who it was. Sarah's head snapped up. What? How? I suspected when I saw you arrive. No coincidence that an educated woman appears exactly when I need a teacher. So I asked questions in Ridgeway, paid for information. It was Crawford's former business partner, a man named Dalton Reed. He owed Crawford money, wanted to humiliate him by sending an unwanted bride. Petty revenge between small men. Rage flared hot in Sarah's chest, then died just as quickly. What did it matter now? That life, those people, felt like they belonged to someone else. Why tell me this? Because you deserve to know. And because Dalton Reed is also trying to buy land rights from my people through fraud. His forging documents, lying about what the papers say. Without someone who can read English to verify, my people could lose everything. Maka Ozangzang's voice dropped. I need you to come to Fort Benson with me. Help me read those documents, make sure we're not being cheated. Of course. Absolutely. Sarah didn't hesitate. These people had saved her life, given her purpose. This was something concrete she could do to repay that debt. There's more. Maka Ozangzang took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. When we go to Fort Benson, people will ask questions. A white woman traveling with a Lakota chief raises suspicions, invites trouble. It would be simpler, safer, if you were my wife. Sarah's heart stopped. Your wife. In name, to satisfy white authorities. Unless, he met her eyes, and she saw something she hadn't expected there. Vulnerability. Hope. Unless you might consider making it real. I know it's too soon. I know I'm asking something impossible. A month ago, you didn't know I existed. You came here with no choice. But Sarah, when I watch you teach the children, when I see how Star Woman has come to care for you, When I lie awake thinking about a future that might include more than just survival. Yes. The word escaped before Sarah could think, could doubt, could list all the reasonable objections. Yes, I'll marry you. For real. Maka Ozayangzayang stared at her. You're certain? You understand what it means? You'd be leaving the white world behind completely. The white world already left me behind. Sarah squeezed his hand. That nightmare with Crawford's false letters, it led me here. To children who challenge me, to star woman who treats me like family, to you. A man who sees past skin color to the person beneath. A man who leads with wisdom and courage. A man I've come to, she paused, testing the truth of it. A man I've come to love. He pulled her into his arms, and Sarah felt something click into place, like a key in a lock she hadn't known existed. This was nothing like the desperate fantasy she'd built around James Crawford's lies. This was real, complicated, uncertain, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. The ceremony will be in both traditions, Maka Ozayangzayang murmured against her hair. We'll honor both our peoples. 3 months later, Sarah stood in a small cabin at the edge of the reservation that wasn't a reservation, holding Redbird's baby brother while the girl herself read aloud from a McGuffey reader with barely an accent. Outside, Maka Ozayangzayang negotiated with government agents who'd learned he always brought his English-reading wife to verify documents. Star Woman tended a garden of traditional plants mixed with settler vegetables, creating something new from two worlds. It wasn't perfect. Tensions with hostile whites continued. The pressure to relocate never stopped. But here, in this space between worlds, Sarah had found something she'd never had in Boston's rigid society. She'd found a home. She'd found purpose. And in the eyes of a Lakota chief who'd saved her from despair, she'd found a love worth any sacrifice. The mail-order bride's worst nightmare had led her exactly where she needed to be.